Let's get you another view now. William Foster of Moodys also joining in this afternoon. William, thanks for being with us. How do you read into the fiscal deficit target being revised to 3.8% and at 3.5% for FY21? What's your view on the fiscal path that's been set by the government this budget?
It was generally in line with our expectations. The decision was to basically adhere to the escape clause of the Fiscal Responsibility and Budget Management Act, the FRBM Act, which allowed up to 0.5% of GDP for any slippage based on structural reforms. And the basis for it, which was cited in the budget materials, was mainly the corporate tax reforms, reducing the corporate tax. So that was in line with what we had expected. Moving forward, the glide path now is anticipating 3.5% deficit next year, and then slowly, gradually going down from there to 3%. That's certainly the right direction. The challenge right now really is how do you get there? And that's the difficult thing to see. That's going to be very much based on growth returning, particularly nominal GDP growth, and that then spilling over into more favorable revenue buoyancy so that tax collections can be higher, which would then allow for more spending to stimulate the economy. And that's the challenge that the government has right now, is striking that balance. It's unclear how they're going to hit the 10% nominal GDP growth target that's set out for next year.
So how do you rate this year's budget, going by the announcements made and projections for the roadmap, especially on the fiscal side?
Well, you may be familiar. We had a rating action in November of last year. We changed our outlook for India's Baa2 credit to negative. And the reason for that was the fact that growth is much lower than had been anticipated. And there's a risk right now that it will not pick up to the high levels that we've seen in the past, particularly for nominal GDP growth, which then would make fiscal consolidation all the more challenging. And that's what's most important for India's credit rating, is addressing that fiscal challenge. It stands out in a very negative way relative to peers. So to give you an example, India's debt to GDP ratio for the general government level, which is both the central government and states, that's how we look at it, is about 70% debt to GDP. Whereas the peers in the rating group for India have a much lower debt to GDP ratio of about 55%. And when you look at other comparables like interest payments to revenue, it's much higher for India, as well as just the overall deficit. India's deficit, when you add the state and the central government, based on these new numbers, is about 6.8% of GDP versus about 2.1% for the peer group. So that's a real challenge for India moving forward. And any changes moving forward would really have to do with whether growth can pick up and that be used to sustainably bring down deficits in the future.
But what in particular stood out for you this budget? Big misses or things you wish had been addressed better? Do you foresee any challenges in achieving the targets which were laid out?
Well, we have a balanced approach to the budget. What we're really focused on is the extent to which the assumptions in the budget are credible and can achieve the objectives that were set out. And so that was the main lens through which we look at the budget. The intent of bringing down the deficit to 3.5% next year would largely be driven by growth, nominal GDP growth in picture being achievable, and then tax buoyancy. So the ability to collect more revenues based on the policy set out and higher growth will be the main basis for being able to get to that deficit target, along with expenditure that would be again, realistic. I think in terms of some of the positives, certainly I think we were encouraged to see that the FRBM was at least acknowledged this time around, and there is a intent to bring consolidation back, to bring the medium-term deficits down toward 3% over time, and that spilling over into lower debt to GDP. That's important as a commitment. But that in and of itself is not enough. You need to actually see that transpire, and what we've seen from year to year is obviously that's not happening. So the extent to which the assumptions are realistic is important. The nominal GDP growth assumptions for 10%, I think that's going to be a headwind from our perspective. That's going to be a challenge. We see nominal GDP growth probably coming in closer to somewhere below 9%. but the extent to which the government can heal the financial system, particularly provide support to MBFCs, and that in turn lead to consumption picking up from households and real estate sector stabilizing will be very important. That's something we're following. I think that on the GST front, which is really critical, obviously, for revenues, it is encouraging to see an ongoing acknowledgement and commitment to addressing the implementation challenges. And there was a mention of the fact that it's going to be a new system put in place to try to enable faster recovery of receipts for households. So that would be, and businesses, that would be good if that can be achieved. And CapEx is really important on the expenditure side, capital expenditure. So there's intent to try to bring that up to try to stimulate infrastructure and rural roads and highways, et cetera, more that will contribute to potential growth of the economy, and that would contribute directly to nominal GDP growth picking up. But that all needs to actually be achieved through good implementation. And I think that's one challenge we see from year to year is implementing the plans is not always achieved as the budget lays it out.
What's the most pressing concern at the moment, William? What needs immediate attention to kick off growth?
Well, growth is the most pressing need, period. And how you get there can be multifold. There are different ways to do that, but fundamentally, you need to see people feel confident to spend money again. So consumption. So measures need to be taken to bring that confidence back to households, and that really has to do with being confident that their economic security is in place, and that has probably a lot to do with job security and the expectation that the future will be better than today. So that needs to be reinforced, and people need to believe that. And businesses need to spend, so investment needs to pick up. And part of that has to do, obviously with the environment, but also just, again, expectations for the future. And one of the challenges right now for both households with regards to consumption and businesses is the fact that the financial system remains challenged. So we've had a history of, obviously public sector banks have been challenged, but more recently, over the recent years, the MBFCs. And that's really hit credit growth and credit that's being supplied to households, credit that's being supplied to businesses. And so in addition to, stimulating demand from those two entities, you need to see the supply of credit pick up again so that they can spend money if they do believe in the future. And so that's a real important thing for the government to continue to focus on is addressing the challenges in the MBFC sector as well as the banks and getting those in a stable place where growth can then pick up from there.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thanks so much for joining us, William. Always good getting a view from you on how things stand currently.